In 1978, a radio host went on air and laughed at a 19-year-old Prince, calling him a nobody and refusing to play his music. At the time, that single moment could have ended Prince's career before it even started. Years later, after Prince becomes one of the biggest artists on the planet, fate puts those two men in the same room again. But Prince doesn't yell, insult, or seek revenge the way you'd expect. What he does instead is so calm and so perfectly timed that the man who once mocked him breaks down in tears. The radio station was KMOJ, a small Minneapolis AM station that prided itself on being the voice of the black community, the gatekeeper of what was acceptable, what was black enough, what deserved airtime in a city where black artists fought for every second of exposure. The DJ was named Richard Cole. Everyone called him Rich C. And he'd been on air for 15 years, long enough to believe his taste was gospel, long enough to think he could spot talent, or the lack of it, in 30 seconds of listening. Prince had just pressed his first demo, had spent every dollar he'd saved from small club gigs to record 3 songs at a local studio, believing with the kind of naive certainty that only 19-year-olds possess that all he needed was a chance, one opportunity for people to hear what he could do, and everything would change. He'd brought the demo to KMOJ personally, walked into the station with his afro perfectly picked, wearing clothes he'd spent hours choosing, trying to look professional but also like himself, trying to bridge the gap between who he was and who he thought radio programmers wanted him to be. Rich C had taken the demo without really looking at Prince, had tossed it onto a pile of other demos from hopeful artists who thought they were special, who thought they had something the world needed to hear. "Leave your number," Rich C said dismissively. "We'll give it a listen." Prince left his number, waited 3 days, called back, was told Rich C was busy, called again the next day, and the next, finally got through on the 6th try. His heart hammering, because this was it. This was the moment when someone who mattered would tell him yes, would validate that the hours he'd spent practicing, the sacrifices he'd made, the belief he'd held on to, despite everyone telling him he was too weird, too different, too much, that it all meant something. "Yeah, I listened to your demo," Rich C said, and Prince could hear other people in the background, could hear laughter, could sense that this conversation was being performed for an audience. "What's your name again?" "Prince? That's not even a real name." "That's what you call yourself?" "Yes, sir," Prince said quietly, professionally, trying to ignore the mockery he could hear creeping into Rich C's voice. "Well, Prince," and the way Rich C said his name made it sound ridiculous, made it sound like a joke. "I'm going to be straight with you because someone needs to tell you the truth. This music, it's not for us. It's not black music. It's not white music. It's just confused. You're trying to be Sly Stone and Joni Mitchell and Santana all at once, and it doesn't work. You can't be everything. You have to pick a lane." Prince gripped the phone tighter. "But that's what makes it different. That's what makes it different isn't good," Rich C interrupted. "Different is just different. And in this business, different means you're a nobody, which is what you are right now. A nobody with a fake name and music that doesn't know what it wants to be." Then Rich C did something worse than reject him. He put Prince on speakerphone, let his words broadcast through the studio so his colleagues could hear, could laugh along, could participate in the ritual humiliation of another hopeful artist who didn't understand how the industry worked. "We've got Prince on the line," Rich C announced to whoever was listening. "He wants to know why we won't play his demo. Should we tell him? Should we break his little heart?" Laughter. Multiple voices. People Prince couldn't see, making judgments about his life's work, about the music he'd poured his soul into creating. "The truth is, Prince, and now Rich C's voice had taken on that false sympathy that's crueler than direct insult. You're not good enough. You're not black enough for black radio. Not white enough for white radio. Not talented enough to transcend either category. You're just a kid with big dreams and limited ability. And the kindest thing I can do is tell you now, find another career, because music isn't going to happen for you. You're nobody, and you're going to stay nobody. The line went dead. Rich C had hung up, had delivered his verdict, and moved on to the next song, the next caller, the next moment in his day that didn't include thinking about the 19-year-old kid he'd just crushed. Prince sat with the dial tone buzzing in his ear for a long time. Sat in his small apartment with second-hand furniture and posters on the walls and a keyboard that had cost him 3 months of dishwashing wages. He felt something break inside him, not his spirit, not his belief in his music, but something else. His trust that the gatekeepers would be fair. His faith that talent alone would be enough. His naive certainty that if he just made good music, someone would recognize it. He cried that night. 19 years old, alone, with a demo that had cost him everything, and a radio DJ's voice echoing in his head. You're nobody. You're going to stay nobody. But Prince had grown up poor, had grown up watching his parents' marriage dissolve into violence, had grown up being too black for white kids and too weird for black kids, existing in the painful space between categories that society uses to organize people into manageable boxes. And he'd learned something from all that pain, all that rejection, that being told you're nothing can either destroy you or forge you into something harder than the people doing the telling could ever imagine. So Prince dried his eyes, looked at his keyboard, made a decision, not to prove Rich C wrong, that would come later, inevitably, but to prove himself right, to validate his own belief that he had something worth saying. Even if the gatekeepers couldn't hear it, he spent the next year working harder than he'd ever worked, took every gig, weddings, bar mitzvahs, clubs so small they didn't have stages, just corners where musicians set up and hoped someone would listen, built a following person by person, show by show, converting skeptics into believers through nothing but the undeniable power of watching him perform. Got signed by Warner Brothers not through radio play, but through a showcase where he played every instrument himself, where executives watched in stunned silence as a 20-year-old kid created a full band sound alone. Released his first album, then his second, then his third, each one getting more attention, more respect, more proof that Rich C had been catastrophically wrong about what audiences wanted. By 1984, Prince had Purple Rain, the album, the movie, the cultural phenomenon that transcended music and became a moment when everyone, regardless of race or taste or category, had to acknowledge that this weird kid from Minneapolis had been right all along. KMOJ started playing his music then. Of course they did. Once he was successful enough that not playing him meant irrelevance. Once the risk was gone and the rewards were guaranteed. Rich C himself introduced Purple Rain on air, talked about Prince like he'd always believed in him, like he'd seen this coming all along. Prince heard about it. Friends called to tell him, laughing, pointing out the irony that the same station that had rejected him was now riding his coattails. But Prince said nothing publicly, didn't call out Rich C, didn't mention the humiliation, just kept working, kept creating, kept becoming more successful, until he was no longer a musician, but a phenomenon, until his name meant something beyond music and into culture itself. Then came 1987. Prince was doing a charity event in Minneapolis, a fundraiser for youth music programs, because despite everything, despite the success and the global fame, he remembered being 19 with a demo and a dream. The event was at a downtown hotel, black tie, expensive tickets, the kind of affair where Minneapolis society came to be seen and to feel good about themselves for supporting the arts. Rich C was there. Of course he was. He'd bought a table, brought colleagues, was holding court about the old days, about how he'd always known Prince was special, how he'd played his demos before anyone else recognized the talent, rewriting history the way people do when they're on the wrong side of it. Prince saw him across the room, recognized him immediately, even though 9 years had passed, even though Rich C had aged in ways that Prince hadn't gotten heavier, grayer, more comfortable in the authority he'd built from judging other people's dreams. Their eyes met. Rich C's face went pale, then red, because he remembered too. Remembered exactly what he'd said, exactly how he'd said it, exactly who he'd said it to. Prince excused himself from the conversation he was in, walked across the ballroom with everyone watching, because Prince couldn't go anywhere without being watched now, couldn't make any movement without it meaning something. He walked directly to Rich C, who was frozen, whose colleagues had gone quiet, sensing that something was about to happen, but not knowing what. "Rich C," Prince said quietly, extending his hand. "It's been a long time." Rich C took the hand mechanically, his brain trying to calculate what was happening, what this meant, whether this was going to be public humiliation or something else. "Prince," Rich C managed, "I was just telling everyone about how you called me a nobody." Prince interrupted gently. "About how you put me on speakerphone so your whole station could laugh at my demo. About how you told me to find another career because music wasn't going to happen for me." The table went silent. Everyone staring. Rich C's colleagues suddenly understanding that they were about to witness something. That the stories Rich C had been telling about always believing in Prince were lies, that there was history here, that Rich C had tried to bury. Rich C started. But nothing came after that. No excuse, no explanation. Just the naked reality of his own cruelty reflected back at him by someone who now had all the power, all the success, all the vindication. "I wanted to thank you," Prince said, and his voice was sincere, not sarcastic. "Because that phone call, that moment when you told me I was nobody, it taught me something important. It taught me that gatekeepers don't determine worth, that rejection from people who can't see you isn't a verdict on your talent. It's a revelation of their limitations." Rich C was crying now. Not dramatic sobs, but quiet tears running down his face, because he was confronting what he'd almost destroyed, what he'd failed to recognize, what he'd dismissed because it didn't fit into his narrow categories of acceptable. "You could have ended my career before it started," Prince continued, "if I'd believed you, if I'd taken your word as truth instead of just one person's opinion. And I think about that sometimes. How many artists did you end? How many kids called your station with their demos, heard you tell them they were nobody, and believed you? How many futures did you kill because you couldn't see past your own prejudices about what music should sound like?" "I'm sorry," Rich C whispered. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know." "You couldn't know," Prince said, not unkindly. "That's the point. You couldn't know what I'd become because you were measuring me against what had already been done. You wanted me to sound like someone else, to fit into a category, to be less than I was, so I'd be easier to understand. And when I wouldn't do that, when I insisted on being exactly who I was, you decided I was nobody." Prince paused. Let Rich C sit with that. Let everyone at the table understand what they were witnessing. Not revenge, but education. A lesson in what judgment looks like from the other side, in what it costs, when you're wrong about someone's potential. "But here's what you didn't understand then, and maybe still don't understand now," Prince said. "Being called nobody by someone who matters gives you two choices. You can believe them and become what they say you are, or you can use it as fuel. Use it to work harder, be better. Prove not that they were wrong because their wrongness is irrelevant. but that you were right about yourself. Rich C was full-on sobbing now. His colleagues, uncomfortable, uncertain, whether to intervene or let this play out. Prince reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out something small, held it out. It was a cassette tape. Old, worn, the same demo that Prince had dropped off at KMOJ 9 years ago. "I kept this," Prince said. "Kept it to remind myself where I started, what I overcame, and I want you to have it back. Want you to listen to it again. Really listen this time, and hear what you missed. Hear what you couldn't recognize because you were too busy protecting your idea of what music should be, instead of being open to what it could be." Rich C took the tape with shaking hands, stared at it like it was a holy relic, which in a way, it was physical evidence of his failure, of the moment he'd been tested and found wanting. "I forgive you," Prince said simply, "not because you deserve forgiveness, but because carrying anger toward you would mean you still had power over me. And you don't. You never did, really. You had the power to play my music or not play it, but you never had the power to determine my worth. Only I have that power. Only I decide if I'm nobody or somebody." Prince turned to leave, then paused, turned back. "There's a young artist who sent you a demo last week," Prince said. "His name is Marcus. He plays guitar, sings, does this thing with his voice that's different, that doesn't sound like anyone else. And I heard through some people that you rejected him, called his music too experimental, told him to come back when he had something more commercial." Rich C's face went pale again, because he had done exactly that. 3 days ago, had dismissed another hopeful artist for the same reasons he'd dismissed Prince, had learned nothing from being catastrophically wrong the first time. "Play his demo," Prince said. "It wasn't a request. Play it on your show tomorrow. Give him the chance you didn't give me. Because that's how you earn forgiveness, Rich. Not by apologizing to me, I don't need your apology, but by being better, by learning from your mistake, by recognizing that your job isn't to be a gatekeeper, protecting people from music that makes you uncomfortable. Your job is to be a bridge connecting artists to audiences. And when you forget that, you don't just hurt artists. You hurt everyone who never gets to hear what they could have created if someone had just given them a chance." Prince walked away then. Didn't wait for a response. Didn't need one. He'd said what he came to say, done what he came to do, transformed what could have been petty revenge into something larger. A lesson not just for Rich C, but for everyone watching, about power, about judgment, about what it means to be human and fallible and responsible for the impact your words have on people trying to become who they're meant to be. Rich C sat at that table for an hour after Prince left. His colleagues eventually drifted away, uncomfortable with his tears, with his silence. He clutched the demo tape like it was the most valuable thing he'd ever held. And maybe it was, not because of its monetary worth, but because it represented the moment he'd been given a second chance. A chance to be better than he'd been, to learn from being wrong, to use his power to build instead of destroy. The next day, Rich C played Marcus's demo on his show, played all 3 tracks, talked about talent, about innovation, about the importance of recognizing genius even when it doesn't fit your expectations. Got calls from listeners who loved it, who wanted to know where they could see Marcus perform, started a chain reaction that led to Marcus getting signed, getting opportunities, getting to find out who he could become instead of being told he was nobody. Rich C called Prince's manager a week later, asked if there was a way to thank him, got a message back. He doesn't want thanks. He wants you to keep playing music from artists who don't fit. Keep being a bridge instead of a gate. That's the only thanks he needs. And Rich C did. Changed how he programmed his show. Started seeking out the weird, the different, the artists who didn't fit categories. Became known not as a gatekeeper, but as a champion of innovation, of artists who refused to be what they were told to be. He never spoke publicly about what Prince had said to him that night, kept it private. But people noticed the change, noticed that Rich C seemed humbler, more open, more willing to admit when he didn't understand something instead of dismissing it. Years later, when Prince died, Rich C went on air and told the story. Told it honestly, including his own cruelty, his own failure, his own tears. Told it as a confession and a lesson about what it means to have power over people's dreams and how easily that power can be abused. He ended by saying, "Prince could have destroyed me that night, could have humiliated me publicly, ended my career the way I tried to end his. Instead, he gave me a chance to be better, to learn, to use my platform the way it should have been used all along. That's not revenge. That's grace. And it's a grace I spent the rest of my career trying to earn." The demo tape, the one Prince gave back to Rich C that night, is framed in Rich C's office now, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of the cost of being wrong about someone, of the responsibility that comes with having a voice people listen to, of the fact that nobody is what you call people when you can't see their potential, and that says more about your vision than their worth. Prince never mentioned the encounter again, didn't use it for publicity, didn't turn his forgiveness into content, because that wasn't the point. The point was the private moment when he'd looked at someone who'd tried to diminish him and chosen to elevate him instead, chosen to teach instead of punish, chosen to transform hurt into help for someone else, Marcus. And every artist after Marcus who got a fair chance because Rich C had learned that gatekeeping isn't about keeping people out, it's about letting the right ones through. That's revenge through success. Not proving people wrong out of spite, but proving yourself right with such undeniable force that the people who doubted you have no choice but to confront their own limitations. And then, most importantly, using that moment not to grind them down, but to lift them up, to show them what better looks like, to give them the chance to become something more than they were when they told you that you were nothing. In 1978, Rich C called Prince a nobody. In 1987, Prince proved he was somebody. But more than that, he proved that somebody isn't determined by whether gatekeepers recognize you. It's determined by whether you recognize yourself, by whether you believe in your worth, even when everyone with power tells you you're worthless, by whether you use rejection as fuel instead of accepting it as verdict. That's the lesson Rich C learned. That's the lesson everyone who heard the story learned. That's why, when people talk about Prince's legacy, they don't just talk about the music, they talk about the dignity, the refusal to be made small, the choice to respond to cruelty with grace, the understanding that true power isn't about proving people wrong, it's about proving yourself right, then using that proof to help others who are where you once were, facing gatekeepers who can't see them yet, but might learn to if someone shows them how.